Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Culture Series. The Culture Series is a science fiction series written by Scottish author Iain M. The stories centre on the culture, a utopian, post-scarcity space society of humanoids, aliens, and very advanced artificial intelligences living in socialist habitats spread across the Milky Way galaxy. The main theme of the novels is the dilemmas that an idealistic hyperpower faces in dealing with civilizations that do not share its ideals, and whose behavior it sometimes finds repulsive. In some of the stories, action takes place mainly in non-culture environments, and the leading characters are often on the fringes of the culture, sometimes acting as agents of culture in its plans to civilize the galaxy. The culture. The culture is a society formed by various humanoid races and artificial intelligences about 9,000 years before the events of novels in the series. Since the majority of its biological population can have virtually anything they want without the need to work, there is little need for laws or enforcement, and the culture is described by Banks as space socialism. It features a post-scarcity economy where technology is advanced to such a degree that all production is automated. Its members live mainly in spaceships and other off-planet constructs, because its founders wished to avoid the centralized political and corporate power structures that planet-based economies foster. Most of the planning and administration is done by minds, very advanced AIs. Although the culture has more advanced technology and a more powerful economy than the vast majority of known civilizations, it is just one of the involved civilizations that take an active part in galactic affairs. The much older Homemda are slightly more advanced at the time of Consider Phlebas. The Morthanveld have a much larger population and economy, but are hampered by a more restrictive attitude to the role of AI in their society. The capabilities of all such societies are vastly exceeded by those of the elder civilizations and the sublimed entities which have abandoned their material form for a non-corporeal, multi-dimensional existence, but these generally refrain from intervention in the material world. Some other civilizations hold less favorable views of the culture. At the time of their war with the culture, the Idirans and some of their allies regarded the control that the minds exercised over the culture as a form of idolatry. The Homemda regard the culture as idealistic and hyperactive. Some members of the culture have seceded to form related civilizations, known collectively as the Alteria. These include the Peace faction, the I-Forget-It tendency and the Zeteticalench. Others simply drop out temporarily or permanently. Main themes. Since the culture's biological population commonly live as long as 400 years and have no need to work, they face the difficulty of giving meaning to their lives when the minds and other intelligent machines can do almost anything better than the biological population can. Many try, few successfully, to join contact. The culture's combined diplomatic, military, government service, and fewer still are invited to the even more elite Special Circumstances, Contact's Secret Service and Special Operations Division. Normal culture citizens vicariously derive meaning from their existence via the works of Contact and SC. Banks describe the culture as some incredibly rich lady of leisure who does good, charitable works. Contact does that on a large scale. The same need to find a purpose for existence led the culture as a whole to embark voluntarily on its only full-scale war, to stop the expansion of the theocratic and militaristic Idirans. Otherwise the culture's economic and technological advancement would have been a pointless exercise in hedonism. All of the stories feature the tension between the culture's humane, anarcho-communist ideals and its need to intervene in the affairs of less enlightened and often less advanced civilizations. The first culture novel, Consider Phlebas, describes an episode in the Idean War, which the culture's minds foresaw would cause billions of deaths on both sides, but which their utilitarian calculations predicted would be the best course in the long term. The Idean War serves as a recurring reference point in most of the subsequent novels, influencing the culture's development for centuries, and dividing its residents, both humanoids and AI minds, along the pacifist and interventionist ideals. In subsequent novels, the culture, particularly SC and, to a lesser degree, Contact, continue to employ subterfuge, espionage, and even direct action in order to protect itself and spread the culture's good works and ideals. These dirty tricks include blackmailing persons, employing mercenaries, recruiting double agents, attempting to effect regime change, and even engaging in false flag operations against the culture itself. Though each of these individual actions would horrify the average culture citizen, the culture's minds tend to justify these actions in terms of lives saved in the long term, perhaps over the course of several hundred years. The culture is willing to use not only preemptive, but also retaliatory actions in order to deter future hostile actions against itself. Banks commented that in order to prevent atrocities, even the culture throws away its usual moral rule book. Andrew M. Butler noted that, having established the peaceful, utopian, game-playing tendencies of the culture, in later volumes the culture's dirty tricks are more exposed. The culture stories have been described as eerily prescient. Consider Phlebas explicitly presents a clash of civilizations, although this phrase was coined by Samuel P. Huntington in 1992. This is highlighted by the novel's description of the Iran's expansion as a jihad, and by its epigraphic verse from the Quran, "Idolatry is worse than carnage." However, it was as much a holy war. From the culture's point of view, throughout the series, contact and special circumstances show themselves willing to intervene, sometimes forcefully, in other civilizations to make them more culture-like. Much of Look to Windward is a commentary on the idea and culture war, from a viewpoint 800 years later, mainly reflecting grief over both personal and large-scale losses and guilt over actions taken in the war. It combines these with similar reflections on the catastrophic miscarriage of the culture's attempt to dissolve the Kilgrian's oppressive caste system. In neither case, however, does distress over the consequences of culture policy lead its representatives to reject that policy. The book illustrates the limitations of power, and also points out that minds and other AIs are as vulnerable as biological persons to grief, guilt and regrets. Place within science fiction. When the first culture stories appeared, science fiction was dominated by cyberpunk, a pessimistic subgenre that worried about, but offered no solutions for, the offshoring of jobs to countries with lower costs or less strict regulations, the increasing power of corporations, and the threats to privacy posed by computer networks. The culture stories are space opera, with certain elements that are free from scientific realism, and Banks uses this freedom extravagantly in order to focus on the human and political aspects of his universe. He even rejects the inevitability of capitalism, which both cyberpunk and earlier space operas had assumed, in creating an anarcho-communist society as the primary civilization of focus. Space opera had peaked in the 1930s, but started to decline as magazine editors such as John W. Campbell demanded more realistic approaches. By the 1960s many space operas were satires on earlier styles, such as Harry Harrison's Stainless Steel Rat and Bill, the galactic hero stories, while televised in film space operas such as Star Trek and Star Wars were thought to have dumbed down the subgenre. The culture stories did much to revive space opera. Literary techniques. Banks has been described as an incorrigible player of games, with both style and structure and with the reader. In both the culture stories and his work outside science fiction, there are two sides to Banks: the merry chatterer, who brings scenes to life, and the altogether less amiable character, who engineers the often savage structure of his stories. Banks uses a wide range of styles. The player of games opens in a leisurely manner as it presents the main character's sense of boredom and inertia, and adopts for the main storyline a spare, functional style that contrasts with the linguistic fireworks of later stories. Sometimes the styles used in accession relate to the function and focal character of the scene, slow-paced and detailed for Dale, who is still mourning over traumatic events that happened decades earlier. A parody of Huntin', Shootin', and Fishin' Country Gentlemen, sometimes reminiscent of P.G. Wodehouse, when describing the viewpoint of the affront. The ship serious callers only, afraid of becoming involved in the conflict between factions of minds, speaks in cryptic verse, while the sleeper service, acting as a freelance detective, adopts a hard-boiled style. On the other hand, Banks often wrong-foots readers by using prosaic descriptions for the grandest scenery, self-deprecation and humor for the most heroic actions, and a poetic style in describing one of the affront's killings. things. He delights in building up expectations and then surprising the reader. Even in the player of games, which is the simplest style and structure of the series, the last line of the epilogue reveals who was really pulling the strings all along. In all the culture stories, Banks subverts many clichés of space opera. The minds are not plotting to take over the universe, and no one is following a grand plan. The darkly comic double act of forbidden and wholesome matter is not something most writers would place in the normally po-faced context of space opera. Even the names of culture spaceships add jokes, for example lightly seared on the reality grill, experiencing a significant gravitas shortfall and liveware problem. Banks often uses outsiders as viewpoint characters, and said that using an enemy of the culture as the main character of Consider Phlebas, the first story in the series, enabled him to present a more rounded view of the culture. However, this character realizes that his attempts to plan for anything that might conceivably happen on a mission are very similar to the way in which the culture makes all its decisions, and, by the end, suspects he has chosen the wrong side. The focal character of the player of games is bored with the lack of real challenges in his life, is blackmailed into becoming a culture agent, admires the vibrancy of the Azad Empire, but is then disgusted by its brutality, and wins the final of the tournament by playing in a style that reflects the culture's values. Use of weapons features a non-culture mercenary who accepts the benefits of association with the culture, including immortality as the fee for his first assignment, and completes several dangerous missions as a culture agent, but complains that he is kept in the dark about the aims of his missions, and that in some of the wars he has fought maybe the culture was backing both sides, with good reason. Look to Windward uses 3 commentators on the culture: a near-immortal behemoth or a member of the race plunged into civil war by a culture intervention that went wrong, and the ambassador of a race at similar technological level to the culture's. The action scenes of the culture stories are comparable to those of blockbuster films. In an interview, Banks said he would like Consider Phlebas to be filmed with a very, very, very big budget indeed, and would not mind if the story were given a happy ending, provided the biggest action scenes were kept. On the other hand, the player of games relies mainly on the psychological tension of the games by which the ruler of the Azad Empire is selected. Banks is unspecific about many of the background details in the stories, such as the rules of the game that is the centerpiece of the player of games, and cheerfully makes no attempt at scientific credibility. Genesis of the series. Banks says he conceived the culture in the 1960s, and that it is a combination of wish fulfillment and a reaction against the predominantly right-wing science fiction produced in the United States. In his opinion, the culture might be a great place to live, with no exploitation of people or AIs, and whose people could create beings greater than themselves. Before his first published novel, The Wasp Factory, was accepted in 1983, Banks wrote 5 books that were rejected, of which 3 were science fiction. In Banks' first draft of Use of Weapons in 1974, his third attempt at a novel, the culture was just a backdrop intended to show that the mercenary agent was working for the good guys, and was responsible for his own misdeeds. At the time he persuaded his friend Ken MacLeod to read it, and MacLeod tried to suggest improvements, but the book had too much purple prose and a very convoluted structure. In 1984, shortly after The Wasp Factory was published, MacLeod was asked to read Use of Weapons again, and said there was a good novel in there struggling to get out, and suggested the interleaved forwards and backwards narratives that appeared in the published version in 1990. The novella The State of the Art, which provides the title of the 1991 collection, dates from 1979, the first draft of The Player of Games from 1980 and that of Consider Phlebas from 1982. Reception. Inversions won the 2004 Italia Science Fiction Award for the Best International Novel. The American edition of Look to Windward was listed by the editors of SF Site as one of the best SF and fantasy books of 2001, after the UK edition had missed out by just 1 place the previous year. Use of Weapons was listed in Damian Broderick's book Science Fiction, The 101 Best Novels 1985-2010, as a posthumous tribute to Iain Banks. Aerospace manufacturer SpaceX named 2 of its autonomous spaceport drone ships after sentient starships. Just read the instructions. And of course I Still Love You, which first appeared in the novel The Player of Games. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?